The millionaire's son hadn't spoken since his mother left, until this maid arrived. The wind from Howe Sound whispered through the tall cedar trees, carrying the faint rustle of distant secrets as twilight settled over the dark slate roof of the Harrington mansion. Perched on the hillside of West Vancouver, the house had once been built to welcome sunlight, warm breakfasts, and the laughter of a happy family. But for 2 long years it had known nothing but stillness, an oppressive, breathless quiet that clung to every wall. Ever since the night his mother vanished without a trace, 7-year-old Evan Harrington had retreated into an impenetrable silence. No voice, no laughter, only the heavy breathing of sorrow and the frantic black lines he scribbled on paper. Daniel Harrington stood on the second-floor landing, staring down at the mist-covered garden where carefully trimmed hedges had grown wild with time. His suit hung loose on a frame worn by sleepless nights, and his eyes, once sharp, were now weighed down by exhaustion. 2 years, 23 nannies. Every one of them had walked away defeated, unable to reach the boy who had closed the world out entirely. When the landline rang, Daniel answered mechanically, but the gentle, steady voice on the other end made him pause mid-sigh. "Mr. Harrington, this is Lena Moore from the Child Wellness Center. I'd like to discuss the position caring for Evan." Daniel pressed a hand against the desk. "You should know something. My son doesn't talk. He doesn't respond. No one has succeeded with him." "I understand," Lena replied, her voice unshaken. "I've worked with many traumatized children. If you're willing, I'd like to try." There was something in her tone, quiet, warm, calming, like a hand reaching into the darkness. Daniel found himself breathing more slowly. 3 o'clock. Today? "I should mention something first," Lena continued. "I wear a scarf over the right side of my face. It's from an old scar. I hope that won't be an issue." Daniel hesitated, but his voice came out weary and honest. "If you can help Evan, nothing else matters." At 3 o'clock sharp, the doorbell echoed through the vast foyer like a lingering heartbeat. Mrs. Dalton, the housekeeper of nearly 20 years, opened the door and froze for a second. Lena Moore stood there, elegant yet simple, her silk scarf draped softly across her right cheek, giving her an air of mystery that felt both fragile and strong. Her dark eyes were gentle, but deep, holding storms no one had seen. She stepped inside with only a small, worn bag. Daniel emerged moments later. "Welcome to the Harrington home," he said as he shook her hand. Her hand was cold, trembling slightly, but her gaze held an unwavering steadiness that caught him off guard. They walked down the long corridor lined with Daniel's award-winning designs. Lena took in every detail quietly, as if each drawing whispered a fragment of the man's story. When they approached the staircase, she spoke softly. "Evan is in the corner room upstairs, isn't he?" Daniel stopped. "I never told you his name." Lena lowered her gaze. "The center provided a few basic details. I assumed you knew." He wasn't sure what to think, but he pushed open Evan's bedroom door anyway. There, in the dim afternoon light, Evan sat curled in the corner, clutching a worn teddy bear. The boy lifted his gaze toward Lena, not frightened, just unbearably sad. Lena lowered herself to the floor, careful not to come closer than he allowed. "Hello, Evan. I'm Lena." Silence. She began to hum, a lullaby soft enough to melt into the air, tender as a late autumn moon. Evan's shoulders shifted. He looked up, eyes widening almost imperceptibly. Lena smiled faintly. "You like drawing, don't you?" Evan nodded. Slowly, he pulled out a stack of papers from under the bed, drawings of a family of 3. In many of them, the mother's face was scratched out so fiercely the paper nearly tore. Lena swallowed hard, but placed her hand gently on the floor. Open, patient, waiting. Evan stared at that hand for a long moment. Then, timid as a whisper, he reached out and tapped his fingertip against hers. Daniel, standing in the doorway, held his breath. It had been 2 years since Evan had touched another person. Lena whispered, voice trembling but full of promise. "I'm here now, Evan. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first fragile moment, the mansion's silence began to shift. That night, the Harrington mansion settled into its usual silence, but something about that silence felt different now, softer somehow, as if Lena's presence had opened a window long sealed shut. Daniel stood at the bottom of the staircase, watching her disappear up to the 3rd floor, where Mrs. Dalton had prepared a room for her. He didn't want to admit it aloud, but something about Lena stirred a quiet, unfamiliar hope inside him. Something he thought he had buried 2 years ago. Mrs. Dalton led Lena into the small guest room. A single bed, an old wooden wardrobe, and a window facing the dim garden. "Ms. Moore," the housekeeper said, as she set a stack of folded towels down. "May I ask why you took this job? Everyone else left." Lena placed the last folded shirt into the drawer. "I've worked with grieving children. I just felt that Evan needs someone patient more than he needs expertise." Mrs. Dalton sighed softly. "I only pray this time he gets a chance." She looked at the scarf on Lena's face, wanting to ask more, but refrained. Later, under moonlight, Lena sat alone by the window. The silver sheen turned her scarf pale and ghostly, casting a quiet sadness across her features. She touched the covered side of her face gently, as if soothing an old memory. "You must stay strong," she whispered to herself. "For Evan." The next morning, Lena offered to prepare Evan's breakfast. She warmed milk, whisked in cocoa, sliced the bread into 3 even triangles, careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic. When Evan walked into the kitchen, his eyes widened at the sight of the cocoa's color, the shape of the bread, details only someone who knew him would think of. He didn't speak, but there was a small spark in his eyes, fragile but unmistakable. Daniel, ready to leave for work, leaned against the counter watching. "You got him to eat more than anyone has in months." "I didn't try to make him eat," Lena replied softly. "I just showed him someone remembered what he likes." After Daniel left, Mrs. Dalton brought Lena to the attic. Dust floated in the narrow beams of light coming through the small windows. 3 large boxes sat in the center. "Mrs. Harrington's things," she said quietly. "I kept them in case Evan ever wanted them." Lena opened the first box. Personal belongings. Scarves, perfume bottles, a silver necklace. The scent lingered sweetly, like a memory refusing to fade. The second box held family photographs, Daniel, his wife, Evan as a baby. Bright, joyful images. But some frames were missing the mother's picture, as if someone had removed them intentionally. Then Lena opened the third box and froze. Letters, documents, and one thick envelope labeled, in trembling handwriting, "For Evan, with all my love, Mom." Her heartbeat quickened. "Mrs. Dalton? Has Evan seen any of this?" "No. I feared it might hurt him even more." Lena unfolded the letter. The handwriting was soft and shaky, written with the desperation of a woman running out of time. She wrote that she never chose to leave, that cruel people forced her to disappear to protect Evan from something far worse. She promised she would return. When Lena folded the letter back, Mrs. Dalton touched her arm. "Who do you think forced her to go?" Lena didn't answer. Her eyes held a painful understanding, something deeper than she was willing to reveal yet. A soft sound startled them. Evan stood in the doorway, teddy bear in hand, staring at the photographs and belongings of his mother. Lena knelt, voice barely above a whisper. "Evan, these are the things she left behind." He moved forward slowly, touching a picture of his mother holding him as an infant. His lips trembled, chest rising and falling as though he were fighting the urge to speak. Then he turned to Lena, not frightened this time, but trusting. For the first time since she met him, he placed his hand fully over hers, not a hesitant tap, but a lingering, deliberate touch. Hope, fragile yet gleaming, began to bloom in the dusty attic air. That afternoon, while Evan stayed in his room clutching the photograph of his mother, Lena quietly slipped out of the mansion. She told Mrs. Dalton she would be back before Daniel returned from work, but inside her chest was a storm of tension and determination. Because she had found something crucial in the attic, a business card belonging to a lawyer named Curtis Hale. The city bus crawled through the downtown streets, depositing her in front of a weathered but sturdy office building. It looked like the kind of place someone would occupy for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal a truth too heavy for daylight. Inside, the receptionist gave a curious glance at Lena's scarf, but quickly offered her a polite seat. A few minutes later, a man with silvering hair and thin glasses opened the office door, studying her with a look of recognition. "Ms. Moore?" he asked. His voice was deep, edged with the caution of someone who had seen too many ugly things. Lena nodded. "I'm here about Mrs. Harrington, Daniel's wife." Curtis Hale's expression darkened instantly. He motioned her inside and closed the door gently, as though the truth they were about to discuss should remain far from wandering ears. "How much do you know?" he asked. "I know she didn't leave by choice. I know someone wanted her silent," Lena replied. Something in her tone, steady, unwavering, made Curtis sit down slowly, like a man who suddenly realized he was no longer carrying the burden alone. He pulled out a worn file from his drawer. "Mrs. Evelyn Harrington came to me a few weeks before she disappeared. She said her father-in-law, Gregory Harrington, was pressuring her, and that she feared Evan would be hurt if she didn't comply." Lena's hands tightened. She had suspected it, but being confronted with the truth directly felt colder than she anticipated. "Why would he do that?" she whispered. Curtis exhaled heavily. "Gregory believed Evelyn wasn't good enough for the Harrington family. He wants complete control over the business, over his son, over his grandson. When Evelyn mentioned separation, he threatened to release falsified documents to have Evan taken away from her." Lena thought of Evan's drawings, of the mother's face scratched out again and again until it nearly tore the paper. Her chest ached. "So she was forced to leave." "I believe so," Curtis nodded. "She wanted to take Evan away to safety, but she had no legal ground. She begged me to help, but Gregory has connections. Everywhere. I couldn't move fast enough." Lena stood silent, absorbing the weight of every word. A sharp ache shot through her, pain for Evelyn, for Evan, and for every child she had ever met in the same silent darkness. Finally, she asked, "Do you know where she is now?" Curtis looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Yes, she still writes to me. She asks about Evan every month, but she's too afraid to appear. Gregory still has people watching the house." Lena drew a slow, steady breath, as though preparing herself for a fall she knew she had to take. "I need to meet her. She's the only one who can save Evan." Curtis considered this, then wrote an address on a small slip of paper. "Go to her. Tell her everything. But be careful, Ms. Moore. If Gregory finds out, you won't be safe." Outside, Vancouver's sky had begun drizzling. Raindrops tapped against Lena's coat like quiet, persistent truths begging to be heard. When she returned to the mansion, Evan ran toward her, teddy bear in hand, eyes wide as if asking, "You came back, right?" Lena knelt and cupped his cheek. "I promised, didn't I?" But behind her gentle smile, she felt it, an approaching storm. Gregory Harrington's shadow was stirring, and the confrontation was no longer avoidable. Gregory Harrington arrived at the mansion on a bitterly cold afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds swirling like a storm gathering breath. His footsteps echoed sharply across the marble floor, making the entire house seem to shrink back from the chill he carried with him. Daniel was still in his office, unaware that the real storm had already stepped through the door. Lena stood in the foyer, a notebook of Evan's sketches in her hands, when Gregory approached. His gaze slid across the scarf on her face before locking onto her eyes. Cold, dissecting, unapologetically suspicious. "You're Lena Moore?" "Yes, sir." Gregory examined her as though she were an object he planned to take apart piece by piece. "I hear you're looking after Evan. I want to know what you have that the previous 23 did not." Lena's voice remained calm, though steady as steel. "I don't have more than they did. I'm simply trying to understand him." Gregory let out a faint, mocking laugh. "Understand? You think someone like you can possibly understand this family?" The frost in his eyes told Lena everything she needed to know. This was the man who had forced Evelyn away, a man who wielded power and control like a blade, cutting through lives without hesitation. Daniel arrived then, momentarily startled. "Dad, I didn't know you were coming." "Of course you didn't," Gregory replied, his tone regal and sharp. "I needed to evaluate the person you've brought into this home." Lena bowed her head politely and stepped away, though she could still feel his stare trailing after her like a long, cold shadow. Later that night, a soft cry echoed down the hallway. Evan jolted awake from a nightmare, breath trembling, clutching the photograph of his mother as if it were the only lifeline in a dark ocean. When Lena entered the room, he immediately leaned into her, small and shaking. "Bad dream?" she murmured, brushing his messy hair gently. Evan nodded against her shoulder, tears soaking through the fabric. Lena tucked the blanket back around him, her voice soft as moonlight. "Evan, some people leave not because they want to, but because they're forced to go, to protect the ones they love." Evan looked up, his red-rimmed eyes trembling with recognition, as though her words had reached the deepest hidden corner of his heart. "It wasn't their fault," Lena whispered, "and it was never yours." Evan pressed the photo of his mother tighter against his chest, then moved closer to Lena. Not with hesitation, but with trust. Pure, quiet trust. In that fragile moment, Lena knew Evan had chosen her as his safe place. He saw something in her that Daniel had never fully grasped, and Gregory would never accept. Lena understood his pain, and she was here to carry it with him. That night, after Evan fell asleep again with the steady breath of a child washed ashore from a storm, Lena remained beside his bed for a long time. Moonlight streamed through the tall window, laying a pale silver glow across his hair, making him look fragile enough to break under the weight of a single memory. His small fingers clutched the photo of his missing mother, as though he were holding onto a part of himself that had been stolen. Lena brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and knew, with a sudden ache, she could no longer wait. If Evelyn didn't return, Evan would remain trapped in a silence that was slowly devouring his childhood. The next morning, after Daniel left the mansion and Evan became absorbed in drawing in the living room, Lena slipped on her coat and walked out of the gate. The morning wind carried the cool scent of Cole Harbor, tugging gently at the scarf that concealed half her face. She hailed a taxi, her heart beating with the heavy, uneven rhythm of someone approaching a long-lost truth. The cafe on Granville Island rested quietly beneath blooming cherry blossoms, their petals drifting across the pavement like spring snow. When Lena stepped inside, the soft chime of the doorbell mingled with the warm scent of cinnamon and almond. In the dim back corner, Evelyn sat waiting, wide-brimmed hat, dark glasses, hands clasped tightly as though holding herself together. As Lena approached, Evelyn looked up. For one suspended moment, her breath caught. Something familiar flickered behind the lenses, as if her heart recognized what her eyes could not. "You're Lena Moore?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. Lena sat down slowly. No, that's only the name I'm using now. My real name is Helena Evelyn Moore. Evelyn stiffened. Shock rippled across her face. Helena? But Helena is... Your cousin, Lena whispered. Aunt Everly's daughter, the girl you chose to be Evan's godmother before he was even born. The words struck Evelyn like a blow. She lifted a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. My God, I didn't recognize you. Because of the scarf? I have to wear it, Lena said quietly, revealing a faint scar beneath. The fire left a mark, and Gregory. He met me years ago, when my family lost everything. If he saw my face, he'd know immediately who I am. Silence thickened between them. Evelyn stared at the woman across from her as though old memories were resurfacing all at once. I tried to protect Evan, and then I was forced out of his life. Lena reached across the table, taking her hand. You helped my family when we had nothing left. I wanted to find you to thank you. But when I learned you were gone, I couldn't stay still. I thought that if I found Evan, I would eventually find the path back to you. Evelyn gripped the table so tightly, her knuckles whitened. Tears slid down her cheeks. Evan, my boy, how is he? Lena inhaled deeply. He hasn't spoken in 2 years. The sound Evelyn made was more a break than a cry. Her whole body folded inward, shaking with grief. 2 years, silent because he thought I abandoned him, all because of me. No, Lena tightened her hold. Evan doesn't blame you. He missed you so deeply he couldn't turn the longing into words. Evelyn wept openly now, years of pain spilling out in trembling breaths. When she looked up again, her eyes were red, but burning with something fierce, maternal, unbroken. Helena, she whispered, can you give me a chance? Just one chance to tell him I never left him? Lena nodded. Evelyn pulled out a sheet of paper, her hands trembling but purposeful, each rounded letter shaped by a mother's love. Dear Evan, Mommy loves you more than anything. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I was forced away from you. I think about you every single day. You were never wrong, and Mommy never stopped loving you. When she finished, Evelyn folded the letter and placed it in Lena's palm, as though placing her entire soul there. Please, give it to him, she whispered, voice trembling but eyes full of hope. Lena closed her fingers around the letter. She knew, from this moment on, Evan's path out of darkness would never be the same again. That afternoon, the sun dipped low over the Harrington garden, casting warm orange light across the swaying forget-me-nots. Lena stepped outside with the letter Evelyn had written, still carrying the warmth of the trembling hands that had given it to her. Evan sat in the grass, hugging his worn stuffed bear, the same one he clung to during every storm inside his small heart. When he saw Lena, he only looked up briefly, eyes tired but gentle. Evan, Lena whispered, sitting beside him, I have something from someone very important. He stared at the folded paper, confusion flickering first, then fear, then the faintest spark of hope. Lena opened the letter and drew a slow breath before reading. Her voice was soft as wind, yet every word landed like a hand touching old wounds Evan had hidden deep inside. When she reached the line, You were never wrong, and Mommy never stopped loving you. Evan froze. Then he cried. Not soft tears, but a cry that tore out of him like a dam breaking after 2 years of silence. His small shoulders shook violently. He clutched the letter, then clutched himself, as if the pain inside him was finally too big to contain. Lena pulled him close, holding him through the storm without a single word. Only warmth, only presence. After a while, Evan tried to speak. His lips parted, but the sound caught in his throat. Evan, don't force... Lena's breath stopped. The sound was tiny, hoarse, trembling, but unmistakable. He tried again, voice breaking, "Mom?" 2 years of silence, shattered by a single word. At that exact moment, Daniel stepped out onto the garden path. He froze, disbelief wiping all color from his face. "Evan?" His voice trembled. "You spoke?" Evan turned to him, eyes swollen, hands clutching the letter. "Mom didn't leave." Daniel rushed forward, kneeling before his son. "Say it again, buddy. Slowly. Please." Evan swallowed, chest shuddering. "Mom didn't leave." He placed a hand over his chest, then pushed outward, showing something being taken away. Someone made her go. Daniel's world cracked open. He looked at Lena, fear, confusion, and rising anger swirling in his eyes. "Lena," he whispered, "you know something, don't you?" Lena exhaled shakily. She had expected this moment, but not like this. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." "Who are you?" Daniel demanded. Lena slowly pulled off her face scarf. The long scar caught the orange light of sunset. "My real name is Helena Evelyn Moore. I'm Evelyn's cousin." Daniel recoiled as if struck. Why come here under another name? "Because if your father knew who I was, I'd never get close to Evan or uncover what really happened to Evelyn." Before Daniel could respond, a cold thud echoed across the marble floors of the mansion, the sound of Gregory Harrington's cane. He stepped into the garden, a dark silhouette under the terrace lights. "Well," he said coolly, "I heard voices." Daniel rose, moving instinctively to shield his son and Lena. "What are you doing here?" Gregory's gaze moved to the letter in Evan's hand. His expression shifted. Recognition, then alarm. "I warned you, son," he said sharply. "You cannot trust people like her." "People like who?" Daniel shot back. "Evelyn? Lena? Or just anyone who challenges your control?" Gregory's face hardened. Daniel's hands trembled with rage. "You said Evelyn walked away. Then prove it. Where are the documents? The evidence?" "I don't need evidence," Gregory snapped. "My word is enough." "No," Daniel said through clenched teeth. "Not anymore." He turned to Lena. "Helena, call Evelyn." Lena dialed, placing the phone on speaker. Evelyn answered immediately. "Helena, is everything all right?" Daniel's voice was brittle steel. "Evelyn, it's Daniel. Please, tell me the truth." Silence stretched, long enough for Gregory's face to drain of color. Then Evelyn spoke, steady but trembling. "Daniel, I never left you or Evan. I was forced to go. Gregory threatened me, fabricated stories, and made sure I disappeared." The air in the garden went still, too heavy to breathe. Daniel turned to his father. "You forced her to leave?" Gregory didn't answer, and that silence was enough. Daniel inhaled sharply, voice shaking with fury. "Get out of my house, now!" "Daniel," I said, "get out." Gregory looked at them, his son, his grandson, the woman he failed to control. And for the first time, he had nowhere to stand. He turned and walked back into the mansion, disappearing behind the heavy doors. Evan stumbled into Daniel's arms, trembling. "Dad, bring Mom home." For the first time, Daniel didn't hesitate. He placed a hand on Evan's head, voice breaking. "I will bring her home. I swear." Evelyn returned on a windless afternoon, the last rays of sunlight brushing against the roof of the Harrington mansion. The taxi rolled to a stop, and when the door opened, she stepped out with the hesitant gait of someone who had left this place too long, carrying too many memories to believe she still belonged. Yet her eyes held something fragile. Hope. The hope of finally holding her son after 2 long years. The front door opened before she could knock. Evan stood there, smaller than before, thinner, eyes still red from crying, yet shining with a light that robbed Evelyn of her breath. They looked at each other for a single heartbeat. Then Evan ran. "Mom!" he cried, broken, trembling, but complete. Evelyn dropped to her knees and opened her arms wide. Evan collided with her, clutching her with the desperation of a child afraid the world might disappear if he let go. He cried without sound, just deep, shaking sobs that had been trapped inside him for 2 unbearable years. "I'm here. I'm so sorry. Mommy's here." Evelyn whispered into his hair, holding him tightly, as if she could mend every fracture inside him with her embrace alone. Daniel stood a few feet away, silent. When Evelyn finally lifted her gaze to him, both their eyes were filled with words that couldn't be spoken. "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly, as though afraid to cause another crack. "You went through all of that alone, and I didn't see it." Evelyn shook her head. "It wasn't your fault, Daniel. I was silenced, forced to disappear. But Evan, he never stopped being ours." Daniel stepped closer, gently touching her shoulder. "Thank you for surviving and for coming back." They didn't embrace, not yet, but the space between them softened as though something long frozen had begun to thaw. Inside the grand dining room, dusty for 2 years, warm lights flickered on. For the first time in so long, the table held 3 plates, and Lena's as well. Evan sat beside his mother, clutching her hand as if afraid she might dissolve into mist. Daniel poured water, his hands trembling. Lena quietly took a seat at the end of the table, ready to remove herself if needed, but Evelyn reached out, smiling gently. "Stay, Helena. You're part of this." Daniel nodded. "You brought Evan back to us. You brought the truth to light." Evan turned to Lena, eyes glistening, and whispered, "Thank you." "Lena." The small, fragile words hung in the air, a second miracle in the same day. Evelyn squeezed Lena's hand, knowing that not only had Evan been saved, but she herself had been given her life back. That night, for the first time in 2 years, laughter, tentative but real, returned to the Harrington mansion, and healing began. In the days that followed, the atmosphere inside the mansion changed so dramatically that it was hard to believe it had ever been a place of silence and heaviness. But peace was only the surface. Beneath it, Daniel and Evelyn still had one final storm to face: the truth about Gregory. That night, after Evan had fallen asleep, Lena stayed with Evelyn in the hallway for a few quiet moments before heading to her room. Downstairs in the study, Daniel pulled out the financial ledgers that Gregory had managed for years. Evelyn joined him, the warm lamplight softening her determined expression. "For 2 years, everything he told me was half-truth," Daniel whispered as he opened the first page. Evelyn didn't respond, but her hand rested on his. Quiet support, firm and steady. Hours passed, and the numbers slowly revealed what they had feared. Gregory had siphoned company funds through falsified maintenance costs, consulting fees, even contracts with companies that didn't exist. Every trail led to private accounts under names tied directly to him. Daniel leaned back, exhaling as though he had run miles. "He didn't just break our family, he broke everything Mom and I built." Evelyn closed the books gently. "Then we end it. No more shadows." The next morning, Gregory was summoned to the company, not as Daniel's father, but as a man who had to answer for what he'd done. He sat across from them in the glass-walled conference room, the sharp morning light exposing every strain in his aging face. Daniel placed the thick folder in front of him. "You used the company as your personal account. The receipts and statements speak for themselves." Gregory didn't argue. In that moment, he looked 10 years older. Evelyn spoke gently but firmly. "No one wants to ruin you, but you must take responsibility." Daniel slid the document toward him, a transfer of full control of the company to Daniel and Evelyn, and Gregory's complete withdrawal from management. No lawsuits, no public scandal, just closure. Gregory stared at the page for a long time. Then, with a trembling hand, he signed. After that, time began stitching their lives back together. Evan blossomed into a lively 8-year-old. He went to school, made friends, laughed more easily than anyone expected. Teachers often said, "Evan has such a strong heart." None of them knew the weight he had once carried in silence. Evelyn, 6 months pregnant now, carried Lily like a quiet promise. Every gentle kick felt like a reminder that after storms, new life always finds a way through. Lena, too, stepped into a new chapter. Daniel, in gratitude deeper than words, sponsored her studies in child psychology, the field she had longed for but never had the chance to pursue. It was at a research seminar that she met Marcus Blake, a young instructor with a warm smile and a calm voice. They fell in love softly, almost imperceptibly. 3 years later, they married in a small seaside ceremony. Evan carried the rings, and Evelyn held baby Lily beside her. 2 years after that, Lena gave birth to twins, Emma and Reed, bright and radiant like the very light she had once brought into the Harrington home. Life, after shaking everything apart, had finally returned to them with a peace they all had earned. 10 years had passed since Evelyn's return, and the Harrington mansion was now unrecognizable. The cold silence that once clung to every wall like thick fog had long vanished, replaced by children's laughter, the smell of warm pastries in the afternoons, and the unmistakable warmth of a family reborn after a storm. Time did not erase memories, but it softened the sharp edges that once cut so deeply. Evan, now 19, was living proof of that transformation. Each morning he crossed the front garden with a notebook in hand, heading to his child psychology classes. Gone was the little boy curled in a corner of his room. In his place stood a young man with perceptive eyes and a heart determined to help children who once suffered as he did. Every time Evelyn watched him step through the gate, her heart fluttered, just as it had the first time he spoke again after 2 years of silence. Lily, 8 years old, bright and energetic, ran to Evan the moment he returned home, chattering excitedly. Emma and Reed, Lena's 5-year-old twins, chased each other through the garden with Lily, growing up like siblings born under the same roof. Yet life has moments when the past quietly returns. On a late winter afternoon, with rain falling like drifting smoke, Gregory appeared at the gate. He no longer carried the imposing presence he once wielded. His hair was snow-white, his steps unsteady, his eyes hollowed by years of guilt never spoken aloud. Daniel walked out first. No anger remained, no bitterness, only the calm acceptance of someone who had learned that forgiveness is not a reward for those who hurt us, but a gift we give ourselves. Gregory met his son's eyes, lips trembling. "I came to apologize," he whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just need to say it." Silence lingered for a moment, broken only by the soft patter of rain. Then Evan stepped forward, towering over his grandfather, no longer afraid. "Grandpa, I forgive you," he said gently. "But the rest, you'll have to forgive yourself for." Gregory's shoulders shook. Daniel opened the gate. "Come in. It's cold." That evening, the family gathered in the grand dining room, golden light pooling over faces that had walked together through both darkness and grace. They kept the 10-year tradition. Everyone shared one good thing from the week. Lily proudly recited her art grade, Emma her new guitar chord, Evan spoke of a nonverbal child who had just said their first word. And the table fell silent with emotion. Daniel glanced around, eyes glistening. "The best thing for me," he said, taking Evelyn's hand, "is that we're still here, together." At the end of the table, Gregory nodded softly, his clouded eyes showing a peace he had never known. Evelyn rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, looking at her family as she murmured the truth they had all lived. Real love doesn't control. It protects, it heals, and it never gives up. Evan smiled. He understood that better than anyone.